Hi and welcome to Swedish Plant Guys. There are a lot of different types of variegated plants, and they are loved and appreciated for their dramatic colors and variegations. But what does that really mean? And what type of variegations do we have? And how, most importantly, does that affect how you should take care of your variegated plants? Now, if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please do, and hit the bell as well so you get a notification every time we put up something new. Please give this video a thumbs up if you like it, that helps us a lot. And also find us on Instagram and Facebook, where you can get sneak previews on upcoming videos and sometimes just a little bit more. Now, the word itself, variegated, comes from Latin, and it comes from variegatus, which basically means composed of different colors. That is why all of the variegated plants in front of me here have different color variations. Now, most plants are not variegated. They are completely green. They can be dark green, light green, nonetheless they are green. And the reason for that is that we have a pigment inside of most plants that is called chlorophyll. Now, chlorophyll has the ability to absorb the light from the sun and convert that light into energy and to help the plant to photosynthesize, to create those sugars and starches that are the food for the plant. Now, some plants actually lack that pigment, and those plants we call variegated, because when we do not have the chlorophyll, what happens is that we have some other types of pigments that come forward and show us different types of color. Now, for instance, there are other types of pigments. One form is called carotenoids, and they give us an orangey type of color instead of green. The other one is xanthophylls, and that pigment gives us a yellowish color instead. So when the chlorophyll is absent, we get other types of pigments that show us these other types of colors. Now, there are different types of variegations, actually quite a few of them, but in this video we will mention three of the most common ones. And the first one is, of course, the genetic variegation, or also called the natural variegation. These forms of variegations are present in nature, and they are stable. That means that they are imprinted in the DNA of the plant and will continue on from generation to generation. Now, why do these exist in nature? Well, it could be a form of camouflage, that the plant is trying to hide from predators or animals that are trying to eat them. It can also be a form of deception, so that, for instance, there are types of spiders that lay eggs on specific plants. So by having a variegated leaf on that plant, it can actually look to the spider as if someone has already laid the eggs on that leaf. Another way can be that the plant looks sick, so that predators will go to another plant that looks better. So that is why they exist in nature. Now, examples of naturally variegated plants that we have inside of our houses are, for instance, the calatheas or the marantas, and also the aglonemas. Like, for instance, this one, this is the silver bay, Aglonema silver bay. And these will always be variegated. They will never become purely green or entirely green. So that is why they're called the genetic variegations. Now, the second type of variegation is called chimeric variegation. And this is probably the most common one we have with our tropical plants indoors. And they are basically a mutation. They are a randomly occurring mutation. So a leaf or a plant that usually is entirely green will all of a sudden get variegated colors or different type of colors on the leaves. So it's a mutation. Now, what actually happens here is that in a chimeric variegation, you have two types of cells. You have one type that has the chlorophyll in it, the pigment chlorophyll, and one type of cell that doesn't. And these two are actually competing for the placement inside of the plant. So you have two different types of tissue cells within the same plant. This also means that this type of variegation is very, very unstable. It can happen that the unpigmented, without the chlorophyll cells, take over. What happens then is that you get leaves that are entirely white or entirely yellow or entirely orange. But you can also have the other way, because the plant usually notices that the leaves, or the part of the leaves that has the chlorophyll, actually produces more sugars and starches. So they are better for the plant. It will help them survive better. So when they notice this, you might see that they start to send out entirely green leaves again. They will stop being variegated. That is because the plant has realized this, that it's better to have all green. So the chimeric variegation is not stable. Now, one very, very popular example of a chimeric variegation is the Monstera deliciosa, the variegated form of that plant. And that costs a lot of money because it's a very rare mutation. And it's also very, very, very unstable. So when you get that to your home, know that it will probably not always be a variegated form. But another example is the pothos. I have different types of pothos here. A very, very stable form of chimeric variegation is the normal, the golden pothos, the Epipremnum aureum. But a little bit more unstable, you have, for instance, the marble queen here, that is a lot more variegated than the normal golden pothos. And also we have the mandula, which is also a very, very variegated pothos. Now the third and last variegation type I want to show you is something we call blister variegation. And the most commonly used and commonly known plant that has this is the Scindapsus pictus. Now this is not a mutation. What has happened on these leaves is actually that we've gotten air in between the pigmented lower layer of the leaf and the unpigmented upper layer. And those air bubbles does so that for us it looks like we have this silvery grayish color on the leaves. So it's actually a reflection from the light that we see. And other types of plants has this as well. For instance, the peperomia, variegated peperomia, is in the same way. But the blister variegation can also form on the veins of the leaf. And not like in these Scindapsus, this is in between the veins of the leaf, or even over some of the veins, but not all of them. But you can also get it on the entire length of the veins of the leaf. For instance, we have this in different types of philodendrons and different types of alocasias. So moving on to probably the most important part of this video, and that is how does all of this affect how you should take care of your variegated plants? So first of all, we have a lack of chlorophyll. What does that mean for you when you take care of this plant? Well, a lack of chlorophyll actually means that the plant will not photosynthesize as much as if it had all green leaves. And this usually means that the plant will be a little bit weaker. It will also grow a little bit slower. And sometimes some variegated plants are actually more prone to getting pests. Not all, but some. And this is because the plant itself can be a little bit weaker. Now, the most common variegation, the chimeric variegation, as I said before, is quite unstable. This means that you're very, very nicely, like this one here, the very, very nicely variegated pothos mandula, can all of a sudden start to push out all green leaves. And we actually have this on this plant here. I have a completely green leaf here, and I have some of them further in on this stem as well. And this is because when the plant sees that, okay, these all green leaves actually produce more for the plant than the variegated, then it starts producing all green leaves. Now, what should you do if your variegated plant does this? Well, first of all, you should remove the leaves that are entirely green. If you do this, you could trigger the plant again to start producing the variegated leaves. As I said before, you have two types of tissue cells within this plant. So if you take away this, there is a big chance that it will continue to give you the variegated ones. So I'll actually do that on this one as well. I will take away the all green leaves. You can just, and when you do this, just follow the green leaf, follow the stem all the way back. And where you see that the stem has variegated leaves, that is where you cut off the stem. So you get away with all of the green leaves, but you leave the variegated ones. So I'll just cut this off here. There. Now, all of these leaves are entirely green. They have almost no variegation on them. However, on the stem here, I actually have this stem here. I have, let's see. No, it's all green, that as well. I'll just take that away, all the way down. But when I look at the stem almost close to the soil here, the stem actually has variegation on it. So when I cut back to the last node, the first node that is coming out of the soil, it actually has the variegation on it. So when it pushes out new growth here, there is a big chance that they will not be green, they will be variegated. Now, the reason for this plant, why it shoots out all green, is because this is actually standing somewhere where it's a little bit dark, too dark for this plant. Since you have a lack of chlorophyll here, the general rule when you have a variegated plant is to place this a little bit lighter than you would if it was all green. It needs more light to be able to photosynthesize on the green parts of the leaves. And this has been standing quite dark. It's actually been standing right in front of my TV at home, which means that it's quite dark. It's a little bit too dark for the Manjula, and that is why it's starting to produce green leaves. So I should move this to a lighter spot. But that doesn't mean you should move it to more direct sunlight, because the lack of chlorophyll also means that it is more sensitive to the direct sunlight. So if you place this somewhere where you get a lot of direct sunlight, it will get burnt, and that will happen fast. So put it in a lighter spot, but not direct sunlight. Another reason for triggering these plants to start to create all green leaves can also be extreme heat or extreme cold. So if your plant experienced that, either extreme heat or extreme cold, then it could start to produce all green leaves. Do the same thing again, follow the green leaves on the stems, cut away the all green, and you will probably be fine. But there is always a risk that it will start to convert to shooting out all green leaves. Now, another thing that could happen is also that the already variegated leaves, the older leaves, can also start to turn green. And if this happens, if you see that it's not the new shoots that are entirely green, but it's the older ones that are starting to become more green, then you have it placed in a way too dark placement. So move that plant to somewhere where it's lighter but not direct sunlight, and you will probably keep the variegation. Now, with all types of variegated plants, you need to have patience. They will probably grow much slower than the all-green siblings. For instance, the Monstera deliciosa, the variegated version of that, it grows extremely slowly. And this is of course because it's not producing as much food. It's not producing as much sugars and starches, which means that it inhibits the growth of the plant. So have patience when you have a variegated plant. Now, with a variegated plant, always look extra carefully for pests. Because it is our experience that when you have a variegated plant, you will more easily get pests. Now, one reason for that could be that the plant is a little bit weaker. I'm not sure that that is the entire truth of it all, but it is our experience. So make sure that you always check your variegated plants to see that you do not have pests. If you see pests on them, attack that issue directly. Use some type of a pesticide or something to get rid of them as soon as possible. Because if a variegated plant gets infected with a lot of pests, it will die more easily. So another thing to consider in a variegated plant is when you are propagating this. For instance, if I wanted to propagate this Pothos mandula here, it is really, really important that I use a part of a stem that has the variegation. Because if I use a part that has greener leaves on them, it will probably mean that that propagation will give me greener leaves. So use some part of the plant that has a lot of variegations, and you have a higher success rate in keeping that. But there are also varieties of plants that when you try and propagate them, for instance, you have the Sansevieria ceylonica. When you propagate that plant, you almost always get a green variety from that. It does not give you a variegated new plant. And this is because the chimeric variegations are so unstable. So you need to know this, that just because you're propagating a variegated plant doesn't mean that the result will give you a propagated. And this also means that variegated plants can sometimes be a lot more expensive. They grow slower, so they take a longer time at the growers, but they also are harder to propagate and to get a lot of them so that everybody can take a part of these magnificent plants. Now, I hope you've liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. That really helps this channel a lot. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please do. Hit the bell as well so you get a notification every time we put up something new. And also find us on Facebook and Instagram, where you can get sneak previews on upcoming videos and sometimes a little bit more. Now, until next time, hej då!